Thank you very much. Madam Master of Ceremonies, Your Worship, the Mayor of the City of Port of Spain, Alderman Raymond Timke, the Minister of Housing, Member of Parliament for Port of Spain South, Ms. Marlene MacDonald, Mr. Newman George, Chairman of the HDC, my cabinet colleagues, all members of the Senate, councillors, executive members of the HDC management staff, members of the media, good morning to you all, fellow citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. There are very few days in the life of a politician when you can feel that your presence in office would have effectively changed the lives of people who are known to you. And today is such a day for me. I feel very much like a salmon coming back to the place where I've been. Not necessarily the place of my birth, but a place that I know so very well. I was writing a few scripts recently in the early hours of the morning about my time in this country, and I was writing about my days and nights in Laventille coming from Tobago. And I had the opportunity to serve as Minister of Housing. And one of the things that I undertook was to try and change the lives of some people that I knew very well. But I want to say something to you, the people that I refer to here. You are the 20 people who today will have an opportunity to raise your family in different circumstances, and the others who will follow as the weeks and months and years flow by. There are some things that the government can, will, and must do for you, and there are some things that you must do for yourself. And while we have an HDC and we have a will and an intention, to the rest of the wider national community, it is not possible or feasible to expect that the government should or would undertake to house every family in this country. But certainly there's a role for the government in changing lives. And today, I'm happy that we're changing the lives of 20 families. When I started out in housing in 2003, it was because the government of the day had embarked upon a major initiative to solve one of the biggest problems in the country. And that problem was an acute shortage of housing accommodation. And while there might have been some accommodation available at some price levels, for a large number of persons at the lower income levels, housing was beyond their reach, even for rent, and more so for ownership. And it's against that background that the National Housing Program of the 2003-2004 era was embarked upon to increase the number of housing units in the country, and by so doing to house families in better conditions. And as we house families in better conditions, we hope and we expect that the general tone and the quality of life of more citizens will improve. And the government could have done that on the scale on which we embarked, because going into 2004, 2005, and going up to 2008, we were having a fairly steady revenue stream, and by 2008, we were earning some real good money. And we were putting away some in savings, and we were spending some on infrastructure, and we were spending a lot on you and your quality of life and so on. And the housing program of that period saw thousands of houses under construction, many being completed and occupied, and many still incomplete. But the intention of the program is still there. But something has changed dramatically. And that thing is that the revenue stream that supported that housing program has virtually not dried up, but has become constricted considerably. When we were humming along, hiring contractors left, right, and center to build as many units as they could, we were selling natural gas as high as $13 per MMBTU. And oil was sometimes as high as $120, $130 a barrel. Today, we see gas prices fall to under $2 per unit. And we see oil prices struggling at $30 a unit, sometimes $28, $29. And the projections are that the price could fall lower and remain there for a while, maybe a long time too. So the intention of the state funding a major housing construction program to solve the problem of the shortage of housing units in the country requires a rethink. And when I addressed the nation before New Year's, I made mention of two initiatives of the government as priorities. One was national security, and two, it was an intention to continue the housing program, but with a revised arrangement for the funding of that program. And let me explain to you this morning what the government is thinking about doing. Because there's a note before the cabinet. As a matter of fact, ministers would have had that note in their boxes last night. And the cabinet meets on Thursday morning. And one of the notes that we'll consider is a note to treat with this whole question of how do we continue to fund a housing program with the state not being in a position to provide the funding to the contractors. Because before, the contractors would all be working for the HDC. They come in and they're hired. The HDC would get money from the treasury and would pay the contractors who would have built the units. The minute you pull the state funding out, then who is going to pay? But the government is saying the program will continue. Well, this is how it's going to continue. We know for a fact that there's a large amount of money in the system, but that money is largely in private hands in the private banking system. That money is earning precious little. Those of you like me who have a few dollars in the bank, no more than a couple thousand, when you get your statements, you will see that the interest that you earn in the bank is almost indiscernible. You could hardly pay a taxi to go and collect it. Because deposits in the bank are earning very little. So those who are very wealthy, they have very few opportunities to earn a good return on their savings. But if we encourage them to spend that money in a program where the earning is a lot better, it is the expectation of the government that some of those persons who own those monies or who can raise those monies can finance the housing program. So how do you do that? The government owns a lot of the sites. The HDC owns a lot of the sites, and we can bring more into the sites. The private sector also owns a lot of sites on which houses can be built. What we are going to do is to look at the HDC's application profile, which is a list of tens of thousands of persons who are able and willing to sustain a mortgage. But if the house is available to them in an affordable way, they will be able to pay the mortgage. So what the government will do is to set the program in train by putting a pool of mortgage funds available at TTMF and in that arrangement with TTMF and Home Mortgage Bank, which we intend to merge. And that pool of mortgage funds would be available for easy access by persons who are qualified for a mortgage. But there has to be a house to be bought. And what we are going to do is at the stage of identification of the building sites, whether public or private, we will invite the private sector to come in to see or to bring designs available for construction, negotiate with value for money in mind all the time, and get an agreement with the HDC as to what would be built, at what cost, and then the contractors will go out and build them using the private sector funding. But the HDC must be in a position that as soon as those buildings are completed, to execute a mortgage for those who can afford a mortgage, and then such a person, such a family, will have access to the mortgage pool funds, the contractor will be paid immediately, and the new homeowner will begin to pay the mortgage. And of course, what we are going to agree price-wise would be an arrangement where there would be a good return for the construction of those houses. And we can do that kind of arrangement, agreeing on the price of private land coming in or the price of public land going into the program. So after Thursday, when the note is approved at Cabinet, if my colleagues agree, we will very soon, within a fortnight or so, be inviting the private sector to come into the HDC, to view these proposals, to identify where the private sector has property or where the state has property to be made available to the contracting fraternity. And we will enter into priced arrangements for housing units to be built by private funding, which will access the housing program pool of mortgage funds. That way we put the money in the country to work, and those who own the money will set about to do something valuable to earn from that money. What housing does is that it moves the economy in a very significant way. The minute that program starts to roll again, the quarries go back to work. The block factories go back to work. The tradesmen go back to work. The suppliers of all kinds go back to work. The truck drivers go back to work. The security goes to work. The lady who sells food on the site goes to work. And of course, you who expect to buy the houses, go to work and save your money and expect to pay your mortgage. So that whole pool of people, whether it is 20,000, 30,000, 40,000, who can afford a mortgage, and if your name is on the HDC, that program is for you. But there are other people who won't be able to afford a mortgage. But they too have tremendous needs for decent housing. So the state will have in that program to encourage construction of housing units for rent to own or for just straight rental. And in those situations, that is where the state's contribution to the quality of life of those who cannot afford a mortgage has to come in with a larger subsidy of some kind. But then, we have to ask ourselves, who owns what the state has at its fingertips? Who owns the resources of this country? It's all the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And if all that you will get as a renter of HDC property is a decent housing unit which costs something that you can't pay for, but a rent that you can afford, and whatever your means are, that is what this country is giving to you, or handing out to you, or holding out to you as your share of the national patrimony, while others will get something else. You are not to be deprived. There are others who get more than their fair share. And what has to happen is that the HDC will have the responsibility of ensuring that the title arrangements for these properties are in position, so that the minute the housing construction is completed, you can execute the mortgage. The HDC will have to have the responsibility of ensuring proper supervision of, and quality control of the programs, so that what the contractor builds will be up to the standard expected of the contract. And the HDC will have to ensure that the pricing arrangements between the contractor and the HDC is done in a way that the state gets value for money. Recently, we saw a runaway increase in the price of housing units in the HDC, moving very quickly from a high of 360,000 to $1 million plus per unit. Well, I'm putting the contractors on notice now that in this program that I've just outlined, it is only those who are prepared to give us value for money that will be allowed to participate in that program. There will be competition for the sites, there will be fairness in the program, and there will not be any tolerance for wrongdoing and corruption. And I want to say something to HDC staff. You are the gatekeepers in this program, and the government of Trinidad and Tobago will not tolerate any hanky-panky encouraging foolishness from staff. You are the ones who the rest of the country would be holding to hold the line to ensure that this program works. And anytime it comes to the attention of the state that there is any professional or other kinds of misconduct in the program, you will feel the full brunt of the law in Trinidad and Tobago. On the other hand, this country will thank you and praise you for doing the job that you set out to do in executing this program so that families can be relieved of the hardships you saw in that video this morning. Professional people treat with contractors at arm's length in the code and tenets of your professional training and upbringing. That is why we have you there. And the HDC could become the mover of this economy in a way that it has not been moved for quite some time. This period of recession that we are in, of reduced revenues, of challenges of all kinds, would be a waste if we do not come out of it having improved our circumstances in a number of ways. And one of the ways that we should improve our circumstance is in our general behavior and the use of public resources. There's no way we can agree that a housing unit to house persons in the public sector must cost $1 million. No way. And the only way we'll find out the real price is competition. And there will be competition, and the incentive would be for the contractor to finish the work as quickly as possible so that you can get your house as quickly as possible without cutting corners and without reducing the quality of the output. So we are quite excited that in a matter of a few months, the housing program can be ramped up again. As I speak to you, there are a number of housing units which have been lying unattended or incomplete for 7 years. There are units which I had been involved in. I left the Ministry of Housing in 2007, November. And some of the units that I was involved in are still incomplete and unoccupied. And that should tell you how we have not executed the program in the way it should have been. So one of the first assignments of the HDC now is to complete those units and to make them available to you, the families who desperately need them. And the Minister of Finance will find the funding because we have increased the borrowing levels, and we will borrow the money and complete them, and we'll make them available to you, and you will then be required to make your contribution back to the exchequer account. What will not be tolerated is for you to go into the units, be comfortable in there, and disregard your responsibility to make your payments. Make your payments to keep your family whole and happy in those units, because these are public contributions paid for by borrowed monies, and that unit is what you have got from the country, and you have a responsibility to discharge, whether it's your rent or your mortgage, so that the program can roll on for the benefit of others. And I spoke to you about security, because many of you have come from or are going into areas where there are intolerable levels of misconduct. And you would have observed how the quality of life would have deteriorated in some communities, not because of any landslide or any pestilence or any invasion from abroad, but by the misbehavior of a few within the community. Today, we just came out of January, where there have been 40-odd murders in the month of January. And it is my view that those who engage in that kind of behavior, terrorizing our communities all over the country, do so with a confidence that they will not be disowned and they will not be prosecuted. Today, I want to say to all those who have that thinking, the government of Trinidad and Tobago is committed to providing all the resources available and to resolutely root out from communities persons who have taken the position that they can commit those kinds of acts and they would not be found out or be prosecuted. It is a great pity that at this time of shortage, that we are having to divert so much of our resources to treat with national security and community safety. But that is number one. Because whatever else you have, however else you may feel, whoever you are, if you don't have personal safety, nothing else matters. So we are prepared to make the resources available to this priority number one. And it's against that background that as chairman of the National Security Council, I have taken into that council some of the most energetic ministers, and we have been meeting very frequently with the authorities, the state's security arm, to reconfigure and to recommit and to rededicate ourselves to having in Trinidad and Tobago a national security response that is up to and in surpassing the criminal element in Trinidad and Tobago. And as we examine the assignment, what we have done so far in the 4 months that we have been in office is to have put in place a new structure within which the security services will operate from a point of view of response and operations and information gathering and training and in holding and sustaining a state response, whether it is in the prison, whether it's on the streets. It has to be a sustained approach to those who believe that they can commit the kinds of crime that has become symbolic of our Trinidad and Tobago in some kind of knowledge and comfort that that is how it should be, and it will not be discerned and it will not be prosecuted. Last week, I have asked the Minister of Foreign Affairs to extend himself from foreign affairs, international security, because the two portfolios are now at the level of the National Security Council, overlapping in some responsibilities, many of which are beyond your knowledge and or consent. But the bottom line is the government has a responsibility to make full use of all the resources. So the minister who has just gone into national security, Minister Moses, his job will be to do a lot of the administrative types of things like work permits, immigration issues, treating with our foreign contacts, and so on and so on. Freeing up the Minister of National Security himself to deal with the program of operation and response and preparing the units to respond every place in Tobago that a response is required and in Trinidad. And yesterday, I asked the President to appoint a parliamentary secretary to the Ministry of National Security. And her job would be to make full use of the anti-gang legislation to ensure that the state's units of information gathering and prosecution ensure that that piece of legislation is used to protect us from those who will so control our communities. And also, while doing that, there will be a number of outreach programs, particularly to young people who are being encouraged into that way of life. Those outreach programs meaning to save them from going down that road and to show them an alternative, using the positives of the Coast Guard, of the Defense Force, of the police, of the general community, to direct young people away from a life of crime, and to bring to you, the adults in the community, some assistance in raising your children who might be a little bit of a handful for you, giving them alternatives. The government will begin to reinvest in the youth camp program again, because that program is useful. The government, under Mrs. Jennings-Smith, will begin to expand the mentorship program and will appeal to nationals who have the time and the inclination, wherever you are, mentor one boy, mentor one girl. And if you save one boy or one girl through your effort in Trinidad and Tobago, it's a contribution that we won't put the dollars and cents on. We will put the programs in place where you can participate. So you will see a series of programs, and you will see a number of initiatives geared at sustainable action in response to something that has been deteriorating our quality of life. The intention is to eradicate and to suppress the general destructive behavior of criminal conduct in Trinidad and Tobago. So the housing program is central to all of this. Central. Because it generates this economic activity that we're looking for. It will generate the kind of growth that will turn the economy around. And what is good about it? There's a huge input of local components, from human skills to materials. And those of you who are in the program, when you get a street or you get a building as your home, treat it like your castle. If not only for you, but for your children. Let your children be proud to come home to where you live. Let your address be a location of pride. Let how you conduct yourself be a pattern of behavior that we can all be proud of. And let there be no no-go areas or no areas where your address is to stereotype you as not belonging to the best that Trinidad and Tobago has to offer. You too have a responsibility. And today, I feel so pleased to be here with the Minister and the MP to have executed this program, to have some of you go forward. That law she mentioned a while ago, called the slum clearance, there's a law in this country called slum clearance, which allows the state to move into areas that have been deemed to be dilapidated and to take possession of those areas and to take responsibility for those of you who are in there, to relocate you and to clear those slums and to build them back to a condition which is suitable for human habitation. It is my commitment to you, the people of East Port of Spain and elsewhere in the country, that the Slum Clearance Act will be enforced and your circumstances will be changed in the process. The employment that we will create is the kind of employment that you can use. And at the end of the day, at the end of this period of challenge, we can look back on it and say, that was when we dealt with some of the long festering sores in and around the city and elsewhere in the country. And that is why there's a minister in this government with a portfolio called Housing and Urban Development. Today is not the end, but is the end of the beginning. I thank you very much for the opportunity, and I wish you good living wherever you go off to live.